Hi and welcome to a really special episode because today I'm taking you behind the scenes into my watercolour wedding stationery business. We're going to be doing some lovely decorative floral place cards. You've been learning some simple smaller flowers and these are perfect to put a really beautiful little border on some place cards. Now these could be used for weddings, but of course for any event, or even if you're just trying to zhuzh up your table for dinner each night. So get your paints and let's get started. The desk looks a little bit different today, doesn't it? There's a lot of other kit. We will be getting the watercolours in a minute, but first off we need to talk through how we're going to make these place cards. Don't be intimidated by all the stuff, it's just I want to show you some of the options. So we'll move some things out the way and we will first have a look at the paper itself. So I like to use a lovely piece of natural handmade paper which is called Khadi paper, Khadi, and it is it's got a similar texture to watercolour paper. This is some simple normal cold press watercolour paper, just so you can see, but from the side you'll be able to see there's already quite a wave in that paper, whereas watercolour paper is already nice and smooth. Now the place cards we're going to make today are going to have this lovely raw edge, and that is what Khadi paper is well known for. However, I do want to show you that it is possible to achieve a good tear on watercolour paper, but it's always much easier to do it on the Khadi. I have two rulers here. This is just a regular metal edged ruler. It's got a metallic bottom and it just means it sort of sits up off the page a bit. This is a Westcott special decal edge ruler, which I bought when I was first starting out thinking it would be handy, but I've actually found that I prefer to use the metal edge, but I thought we would have a go at both so you can see. So on this Westcott ruler you'll see we've got this really jaggedy sort of mountain range edge, and on this side a slightly smaller but still quite rough edge, and the whole point of this ruler is so you can place it down and tear regular paper to get these rough edges that we sort of want to achieve from here. So let's have a go. I've got a spare piece of watercolour paper here because this is a bit I want to keep nice, and let's just see what happens. So if I use the smaller edge, I just want to keep it pressed down and just tear away scrap paper. So from doing that, of course, it's quite exhausting. We do get a rough edge. It's not bad, it's quite good. I think I'm just always referring back to this and looking how lovely and natural that is. Okay, let's have a go this time at pulling away with the larger edge so we can compare. So I always also struggle to just get my hands in the right place for this one. So with watercolour paper it's quite hard until you get into a rhythm, and of course this happens to the paper. If you are wanting to use this bit, it's a bit ruined really, but you see that edge is really rough and jaggedy. So this ruler is good for a thinner paper, but when you're trying to use actual watercolour paper I find it a little bit tough to use. However, if I'm just tearing with my ruler, a straight ruler, I find that I still get a really nice rough edge because I'm still tearing, and I find that edge just a little bit more authentic than the decal edge ruler. So if I'm using watercolour paper I will still actually use my straight ruler rather than one of these, but as I said, this is kind of fun if you're using a thinner paper, but we need watercolour paper or at least the Khadi paper for this. So I'm going to put this to one side for a moment and opt for this. Okay, so we can remove those out the way. And let's go back to our bits of paper. So when I make a place card, I like to have it sort of roughly sort of 3 to 4 centimeters thick. So I find, to be honest, if I just lay the ruler down and give it a little bit of leeway on that side, that is usually a really good amount of space for a place card, because then you've got enough room to write someone's name in a nice big bit of calligraphy and enough room to put a nice little bit of decorative floral detail. So let's just rip up another one of these. So a bit of space. And this is a cotton rag paper. So you can see that there's just this little bit of almost like seams or something are coming through it, but it's just lovely. So I really love this paper. If we did it with this, because we're gonna contrast and compare, I need to rip both edges of this bit of watercolor paper. So that'll do like that. Whoops, bits of paper flying everywhere. So we also could do with ripping off the edges there and there, but we can do that shortly. But this is our sort of two comparative pieces. Now the next thing that I like to do is to place a little hole and an eyelet in the place card, for then we're able to put a little bit of ribbon through and make a lovely little sort of tag for this place card. Some people like to use their place cards to sort of tie onto little favours and things. So this is a crocodile. Yes, you heard that right, a crocodile. And it's great because it's a dual purpose thing. Firstly, it can punch a hole in the place card. So I'm just going to punch the hole like that. Now the cool thing is it has a setting here which you can move up and down to allow for how much space you want on the edge for the hole to be. So I like that amount of room. So we've got our little holes, but the next thing is it can also add in an eyelet. I buy these on Amazon. They are readily available in a number of craft stores, but essentially I just use the single eyelet. It's sort of this funny little sort of chimney pot shape here. And what I tend to do is I stick it in there, and then on your hole punch here, it will have a handy little sort of illustration on the side showing you which way to put your eyelet in. And then you just want to squeeze it, and out comes a beautifully punched eyelet. So let's just do it on this one as well. So check the illustration on the side. And it works really nicely on both the watercolour paper and the cardie paper. Okay, the next stage is to do some watercolour. So I'm just going to clear this up and we'll get painting. Here we are in the slightly more familiar setting. I've got some really nice blue silk ribbon to go with these place cards, and I've got silver eyelets. So I want to think of flowers that are going to complement the blue and the silver. So I've turned my palette round, so we've got all the blue tones here. I think we'll just go for a nice range of different blues, and I'm going to paint some lovely little flowers. Now because I'm painting things in blue, it's not going to mean that everything is completely sort of 100% accurate in terms of colour. So I could paint like a blue daisy, couldn't I? I like the idea of things just all following that nice blue tone, but I'm not so worried about being completely anatomically accurate. Now the other thing is I've got a lot of blues in my palette, but I want to make sure that they complement the blue of my ribbon. So let's have a look here. I think that blue could be quite good, maybe knocked back a little bit. Okay, so it's always good to have your colour reference in there. so you can see it. So we might get a slightly grey blue. That's quite a nice colour. Okay, so that's going to be my main colour. So let's start off with the watercolour paper first. So I'm going to use my 2.0 of my 2/10 brush, and I'm going to have, I think I'm going to have a name there, and then I'd like the idea of putting in a little sort of border of flowers here. So what shall I go for? I think I'm going to start with a little rose. So we're working really small here, and of course I'm not particularly sure if blue roses exist, but again, this is a sort of themed place card for a wedding or an event. It could be the Frozen premiere after party, couldn't it? With all these lovely little colours in. So I've got a nice rose there. I think I'll also pop in just a fraction of darkness in there as well. And I'm going to have some little leaves coming off the side, just constantly mixing up a bit more colour. So, you know, this place card tutorial is really, could work for any kind of themed event you might have, but it's just so lovely to be able to come up with something that's a little bit more personal. At the moment, as I paint this, we are in the UK just starting to allow small scale weddings again, from coming out of COVID and things, and so it means that I am being asked to do a lot more sort of detailed little hand painted things that maybe are a little bit more detailed and time consuming, as opposed to if I was working on a wedding that had hundreds and hundreds of place cards and things where you probably wouldn't be able to hand paint every single one. So it's quite a nice sort of fallout of what's been a very sort of distressing and disruptive time, that maybe it might give people a chance to think about doing things a little bit differently. Okay, so we've got a lovely rose, and to be honest, I don't think we need a huge amount more. I might just sort of do a quick little sort of doodle flower. And this is a sort of miniature version of a flower that was in my easiest watercolour flowers ever tutorial, so I'd highly recommend going and having a look at that. So just playing around along the border there. Just creating some really nice little flowers, little details. Putting in some extra little things there. So that's quite a nice little sort of edge of pattern there. And then we're going to have a nice name and a bit of blue silk ribbon. So that was just using a range of blues, and I'm just popping in the tiniest bit of Mars black just to give it a bit more depth and interest. So that is one way of sort of making a lovely colour palette from a silver and a blue ribbon piece, and just using a smallish brush and just filling up the corner there. And then if I use my cardi paper, I'll keep that one in there for reference. Now the other way we could look at the blue colour palette is by thinking about complementary colours. I'm just going to get my colour wheel, one moment. This is a colour wheel, and on it we can see the spectrum of colour, and we've got blue over here, and if you look across a colour wheel to the opposite side, you will find what we call a complementary colour. A colour that on one hand is completely at odds with it, but can also work as a fantastic colour palette companion. So I'm going to have a look at creating a nice bit of colour using some warmer shades alongside the blue. So I'm going to get the ochre out. This reminds me of a kind of slightly retro Orla Kylie design vibe. So we're going to have some ochre, and we're going to have some orange, and we're going to have some blue. So I just want to give you another option. It's kind of a fun colour palette, I think. Can always be a bit of a risk, but this is what this is all about. This is experimentation. So this time I'm going to use my blue as the stems, and the leaves there. And then I'm going to use the orange and do a slightly more folk art style flower. And it's a very different approach, but I think it works just as well. And then I will use my ochre down here. And sort of reverse the pattern and give myself a lovely blue circle. Maybe do some dots around the edge. Now, if you quite like the sort of folk art style but aren't really sure where to begin, it's really worth having a look at if your granny or anyone has any blue china plates. I love Delftware. That is the sort of name of this style of painting. Slightly sort of strange folky flowers that aren't necessarily completely sort of anatomically accurate, but they've got a lot of character to them, and they can be super fun. And I'm just kind of making it up as I go along, really. Aren't we all, hey? There we go. And then we'll have something coming in the top. Oh, actually no, let's have another one coming in from the bottom, and let's have it slightly different. There we go. So a lot of my sort of watercolour tutorials are about having a bit of fun and messing about a little bit whilst learning a new skill as well. So I really implore you to have some fun with this project idea. It's not always about having a perfectly accurate sort of flower painting. Lovely. And yes, and I think I will just do a few little more of those little teardrop shapes I was popping in to pop a little pattern on the end there. So now we've got two lovely little place card things we can pop a bit of ribbon on. So I've just got a lovely raw edge silk ribbon. I find there are so many places that you could pick up some ribbon like this. I like to use some independent makers on Etsy. I think that's really fantastic because there are loads of nice independent sellers. And you want about sort of 30 centimetres of ribbon per place card, just to make sure you've got a lovely sort of furl of ribbon, just so you've got enough. And it also means you could just trim it later on. And I like to fold it in half, then feed it through. Whoops, a daisy, come on. In it goes, feed it through, find the loop, and then go through the hole. And voila, you've got a beautiful little place card. We'll pop this one on as well. And then the last step of this is a bit of calligraphy. Now, I am also a calligrapher as well as a watercolour artist. I made the decision a few years ago to just focus on teaching watercolour and not teach calligraphy anymore, just because there are so many wonderful calligraphy teachers out there that I thought there are plenty of people doing it better than me. So what I've done is I've added in the episode notes a few people who I think are really fantastic calligraphers, if you're interested in learning the next step, that you can go and watch from, who I think are fantastic. Okay, so we've got our lovely place cards. Next is the naming. So it's time to do some calligraphy. Now, I use Higgins Eternal Black ink, and I have a straight calligraphy pen holder, and I use a Nico G nib. All of these things will become very clear to you if you go and have a look at some of these calligraphers that I recommend. So I'm going to use a dip pen, dip it in the ink, and I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to write, oops. Now, writing on watercolour paper has its challenges because it is a textured paper. But the great thing is it can handle the black ink really nicely, and it does work as long as your nib is nice and new. So that is a really beautifully done place card. So we'll do another one here. Now, the cardi paper is possibly even more textured than the watercolour paper, and it does have a tendency to have little sort of wisps of the cotton that can get caught in the nib. So that is one of the sort of slightly less good aspects of this paper, whilst it is so super beautiful. Right, who shall I write? But I just think having a handwritten calligraphy name is just the perfect finishing touch to your place cards. So I think in comparison, both work really nicely. It's much easier to get a true natural raw edge all the way around a piece of cardi paper that is naturally already got a decal edge, is what we call it. For this one, in the end, I decided to leave the ends straight because I just thought it was kind of cool. The watercolour paper does tear quite nicely. That was done with an actual straight ruler rather than worrying about forking out for a special decal edged ruler. I have just chosen to sort of fill up the end with some little detail. This one a little bit more botanical, this one a little bit more folky, but I think both work really nicely. Thanks so much for watching. There are so many variations with this place card project, so we'll definitely be revisiting it with a new colour scheme, maybe some new ribbons and embellishments. It'll be fun. But for now, it would be lovely to hear from you and how you're getting on. You know, I'm always on Instagram at De Winton Paper Co, and you can send me pictures of your paintings and ask for advice. And of course, down below in the comments section, you can get in touch there. Like the video if you've liked it, and subscribe if you don't want to miss another one. Okay, I'll see you again soon. Bye!